A month passed and Mason found himself increasingly comfortable with Lyra's presence in his life. He noticed subtle changes in her behavior too. She had begun wearing human clothing adapted for her taller frame. She had started using human gestures, sometimes smiling or shrugging in ways that seemed almost natural. She was learning, adapting, integrating. One morning, Mason received a message from military command. All Lunari assistants and their assigned personnel were required to attend an integration assessment the following day. "What do you think this is about?" he asked, showing Lyra the message. She read it, her expression difficult to read. "They wish to evaluate our interactions. To determine if this experiment is successful." "Experiment," Mason repeated. "The word with distaste, is that what this is to you?" Lyra looked at him, her black eyes unblinking. "At first, yes. That is how I viewed our arrangement." But now she hesitated. "I find myself developing what humans might call attachment." Mason felt his heart rate increase slightly. "What kind of attachment interests curiosity?" She moved closer to him, her silver skin catching the light. "A desire to understand you beyond the parameters of my assignment." The next day, they arrived at the military complex to find dozens of other human Lunari pairs waiting for assessment. Mason recognized some of the soldiers nodding to those he knew. He noticed how varied the interactions seemed. Some humans kept their Lunari at a formal distance. Others seemed to have developed friendly relationships. A few pairs stood close together with a familiarity that suggested deeper connections. A woman named Samantha Wilkins approached them with a smile. "Mason," she said warmly, then nodded to Lyra. "I see you've been assigned," one of the scientists. Lyra nodded in acknowledgement. "You have a Lunari as well." Samantha gestured to a male Lunari standing nearby, his skin a darker shade of silver than Lyra's. "Yes, Tarek. He was a navigator on one of their ships." She lowered her voice. "They're not what we thought they were, are they? Not just mindless conquerors." Before Mason could respond, a military official called for attention. The assessment would begin. All pairs would be interviewed separately, then together. The process would take most of the day. Mason and Lyra were separated. He was led to a small room where 3 officials waited, 1 military, 1 scientific, and 1 political. They asked detailed questions about his experience living with Lyra as she attempted to access restricted information, Major Carter 1 asked. No, Mason replied. She seems more interested in cultural understanding than military secrets. Has she exhibited any aggressive behavior? Another questioned. None. She's been curious, respectful, even helpful. Mason found himself defending her, realizing how protective he felt. Do you consider her a threat to Earth security? The 3rd official asked, watching him carefully. Mason considered the question. No more than any individual might be. He found himself choosing his words with care. She was part of an invading force, yes. But she's also an individual, making her own choices now. The questioning continued for almost an hour. When it was done, Mason was told to wait in a common area. He found Samantha already. They're looking troubled. They asked some strange questions, she said when he joined her. Almost like they were looking for reasons to end the program. Mason's concern grew. Where is Tarek still being interviewed? She replied. I hope he's all right. He looked. Nervous, more human Lunari pairs gathered in the waiting area. Some spoke in hushed tones, others sat in uncomfortable silence. Mason found himself growing increasingly anxious about Lyra. Where was she? What were they asking her? Finally, after what seemed like hours, Lyra appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Mason felt relief wash over him. He resisted the urge to go to her immediately, instead watching as she scanned the room. Her eyes found his, and she moved toward him with that fluid grace that still fascinated him. What did they ask you? He said when she reached him. Many things. She sat beside him, closer than usual, their voices low. Many questions about my loyalties, my intentions, my feelings toward humans, toward you specifically. What did you tell them? The truth that I find humans complex, fascinating, unpredictable. That I believe there is much the Lunari could learn from your species if we approached with openness rather than conquest. Her voice dropped even lower. And that I find myself experiencing emotions that have no equivalent in Lunari culture. Emotions that both confuse and intrigue me. Mason wanted to ask more, but they were called for the joint interview. They entered a different room with a single interviewer, a woman with kind eyes but a serious expression. I am Dr. Heather Grant. She introduced herself. I specialize in xenopsychology, the study of non-human psychology. She gestured for them to sit. I want to observe your interaction. Please speak naturally to each other about your experience these past weeks. Mason and Lyra exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed in such an artificial setting. Perhaps Dr. Grant prompted, tell each other something you have not yet shared. Something you have observed or felt. Mason hesitated, then turned to Lyra. I was afraid of you at first, he admitted. Not just because you were Lunari, but because you represented change. Everything in my life was disrupted when you arrived. But now he paused, searching for words now. I would be disrupted if you left. Lyra tilted her head, studying him with those endless black eyes. I did not expect to find value in individual connection, she said softly. The Lunari prioritize collective purpose. Personal relationships are secondary, but I have found something unexpected with you, Mason Carter. Something that makes me question the foundations of my understanding. Dr. Grant observed them, her expression neutral as she made notes. What would you say is the nature of your relationship? Now Mason looked at Lyra, uncertain how to define what had developed between them. We are, she began, then stopped, reconsidering. Friends is too simple a word. Too human, perhaps, yet accurate in some ways. We have formed a bond of mutual interest and respect, a willingness to see beyond our differences, to recognize value in the other. Yes, Mason agreed, surprised by her articulation of feelings he had struggled to define and trust. He added, I trust her. Dr. Grant's eyebrows rose slightly and she made another note. You trust a member of a species that attempted to conquer Earth. Mason met her gaze. I trust this individual, the same way I might trust or distrust any human based on their actions, not their species. The doctor smiled slightly. The first break in her professional demeanor interesting, she said, then continued with more questions about their daily interactions, their communication, their understanding of each other's cultures. Mason Carter stared at the alien female standing in his living quarters and wondered if this was some kind of cosmic joke. The military had divided up the surrendered Lunari after the war, giving them as assistants to soldiers who had distinguished themselves during the conflict. Mason had earned a medal for bravery when he saved his squad from an ambush, but he never expected to receive a living being as a reward. The Lunari female was tall, with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer under the artificial lights. Her eyes were large and completely black, like polished obsidian. Her head was hairless but adorned with intricate ridges that formed patterns along her scalp. Her name, according to the documentation, was Lyra. Mason cleared his throat. This feels wrong, he said. I didn't ask for you. The Lunari tilted her head, studying him. Her English was perfect when she spoke. Humans are strange creatures. You fight a war, capture prisoners, and then feel guilty about your victory. It is not the Lunari way. What is the Lunari way? Mason asked, genuinely curious to conquer, to take what we need from inferior species. She moved around his small apartment, examining objects with long, delicate fingers. We failed. We miscalculated human resilience and resourcefulness. We did not expect your species to unite against us. We thought you would remain divided, easy to control. Mason felt a chill run down his spine, hearing her speak so casually about the attempted conquest of Earth. The Lunari invasion had cost millions of lives before it was repelled. So what happens now? He asked. Do you just accept being my prisoner, my slave? His distaste for the word was evident. Lyra turned to face him again, her expression unreadable. I am not a slave, I am a resource. The Lunari government surrendered me and others like me as part of the treaty. We are to serve humans, to learn from you, to understand why you defeated us. She approached him, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost hypnotic. I have skills, Mason Carter. I was a scientist before the war. I studied biology, specifically the biological differences between species. Mason stepped back, uncomfortable with her proximity. Then why did they give you to a simple soldier? Why not assign you to a research facility? The corners of her mouth turned upward in what might have been a smile. That was my request. Mason blinked, surprised. Your request? Yes, I wish to study an ordinary human, not a scientist, not someone who would treat me as a specimen, but someone who would treat me as she paused, searching for the right word, a person. The next morning, Mason woke to find Lyra standing by the window observing the sunrise. Her silver skin glowed in the golden light, making her look almost ethereal. He watched her for a moment, struck by how alien yet beautiful she was. Have you seen many sunrises? He asked, pushing himself up from his bed. She turned slightly, not startled by his voice. No. Our world orbits a different star. The light is cooler, more blue. The sunrises are not as colorful as yours. Mason joined her at the window, standing a respectful distance away. What was your life like before the war? Lyra considered the question for a moment. Structured, predictable. I worked in a research facility studying genetic compatibility between species. I had rank, status, respect. She turned to face him fully. I never questioned my purpose, my place. But now Mason prompted when she fell silent. Now I am here with you, a conquered scientist, living with a conquering soldier. She tilted her head, her black eyes reflecting the morning light. Is this not what humans call irony? Mason could not help but smile a little. Yes, I suppose it is. He gestured toward the kitchen. Would you like breakfast? As they ate a simple meal, Mason tried to make sense of his situation. Just days ago, he had been fighting the Lunari. Now he was sharing his home with one. He studied her as she carefully examined a piece of toast before taking a precise bite. The Earth government gave us information about your physiology, Lyra said, noticing his gaze. Your food is compatible with our digestive systems, though the flavors are strange to me. Do you miss your home? Mason asked. Lyra set down her toast. The concept of missing a place is unfamiliar to Lunari. We are assigned where we must go. We do not form attachments to locations. But she hesitated, her expression shifting subtly. I find myself experiencing unfamiliar emotions since coming to Earth. Sensations that have no equivalent in my language. Mason leaned forward, curious. What kind of emotions? She seemed to struggle finding words. A sense of possibility, that the future is not predetermined, that choices exist beyond duty and function. It is both frightening, and she paused. Exhilarating, over the yike. Next few days they fell into a routine. Mason went to his military debriefings during the day, while Lyra stayed in the apartment reading the books and viewing the media files he had given her access to. When he returned, they would discuss what she had learned about human culture, often leading to conversations that stretched late into the night. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony of his apartment, Lyra asked, "Why did you become a soldier?" Mason Carter. He looked up at the stars visible through the environmental dome that protected the city. I wanted to protect people, I guess. After the first Lunari ships appeared, there was so much fear, so much uncertainty. I thought I could make a difference. And did you? She asked, her voice soft. He considered her question, thinking of the battles the friends lost, the horrors witnessed. I protected some people, yes. Saved some lives, but war isn't what I thought it would be. Nobody really wins. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. The Lunari believe that strength is everything, that the strong have the right to rule the weak. Our invasion was seen as natural, as inevitable. But you don't sound convinced? Mason observed. Her black eyes met his. I have begun to question many things since coming here, since meeting you. The way she looked at him made something flutter in his chest, something he tried to ignore. She was alien. She was the enemy. Or at least she had been. Now he wasn't sure what she was to him. After the integration assessment, Mason and Lyra returned to their apartment, both quiet, lost in their own thoughts. The questioning had forced them to articulate feelings and observations neither had fully acknowledged before. Mason broke the silence. First, I meant what I said about trusting you, he said as they entered the living room. You know that, right? Lyra moved to the window, her favorite spot in the apartment. I know. She turned to face him, her silver skin catching the evening light. Trust is not a concept valued among the Lunari. Obedience, loyalty to the collective, yes, but individual trust. She shook her head. It is considered a weakness, a vulnerability, but you trust me? Mason asked. Stepping closer to her, she considered the question. I have shared thoughts with you that would be considered treasonous among my people. She met his gaze. What would you call that if not trust? Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of how far they had come from captor and captive, to something neither of them had words to properly define. The next morning, Mason received new orders. He was being transferred to a special joint human-Lunari research project. His combat experience and his successful integration with Lyra made him an ideal candidate. The message indicated that Lyra would accompany him when he shared the news with her. She seemed pleased. This suggests the integration program is being expanded, she said. Those who evaluated us must have seen value in our connection. Mason nodded. But what exactly are we going to be researching? The message said only that it involves biological compatibility studies and cultural exchange. Lyra replied, I suspect it relates to long-term coexistence between our species. They were transported to a remote facility in what had once been called the Rocky Mountains. The complex was built into the side of a mountain partly hidden from aerial view. A mix of human and Lunari technology was evident in its construction upon arrival. They were greeted by a human scientist named Kate Bradley, and a Lunari male introduced as Vex. Mason noticed immediately that they interacted with an easy familiarity, suggesting they had worked together for some time. Welcome to Project Genesis, Kate said with a warm smile. We've been looking forward to your arrival, especially after your assessment results. Vex nodded, his silver skin darker and more matte than Lyra's. You two represent a successful integration pattern, he said. His English was accented but clear, one built on mutual respect rather than dominance or submission. They were shown to their quarters, a two-bedroom apartment larger than Mason's previous home. Kate explained that they would have orientation in the morning, then begin their assigned roles in the project. Once alone, Lyra explored the space with her usual curiosity. The facility is more advanced than I expected, she commented, using both human and Lunari technology, seamlessly integrated. I suspect this project predates the end of the war. Mason looked at her surprised. You think humans and Lunari were working together before the surrender? She nodded. The level of integration suggests long-term collaboration. This was not assembled in the few months since the war ended. This revelation left Mason unsettled. What else don't we know? He wondered aloud. What is Project Genesis really about? Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch cool against his skin. We will learn more tomorrow, she said. Let us not make assumptions without data. It is not the scientific way. The next morning they reported to an orientation room where several other human Lunari pairs were already gathered. Mason recognized Samantha and her Lunari navigator Tarek, among them Kate and Vex entered the room together, standing side by side at the front. Kate spoke first. Thank you all for coming. You represent the most successful human Lunari pairings from the integration program. You've demonstrated the capacity for cross-species cooperation and understanding, which is essential for what comes next. Vex continued. What you have not been told until now is that the war between our species was not inevitable. It was engineered by factions on both sides who feared the alternative. Engineered. Mason repeated the word in disbelief. Kate nodded sadly. Both human and Lunari governments contain elements that believed conflict was preferable to cooperation. These factions sabotaged early diplomatic efforts and pushed for military action, but there were always those of us working in secret for a different outcome. Project Genesis began 5 years before the first Lunari ship appeared in Earth orbit. Vex explained, it is a collaboration between human and Lunari scientists who believe our species are stronger together than apart. We have been studying biological compatibility, cultural integration and sustainable coexistence. One of the other humans, a woman named Olivia Peters, raised her hand. You mean the entire war could have been? Avoided Kate's expression was grim. We tried. The evidence of sabotage was discovered too late. Once the invasion began, the cycle of violence took on a momentum of its own. But now, Mason said, looking between Kate and Vex, the war is over. What is the purpose of this facility now? To build the foundation for true peace, Vex replied. Not just a cessation of hostilities, but a genuine alliance between our worlds. Kate stepped forward. That is where you all come in. The connections you formed, the trust you've built, these are the seeds from which a new relationship between our species can grow. Mason felt Lyra stiffen beside him. He glanced at her, seeing tension in her normally fluid posture. You have not told them everything, she said, her voice cutting through the room. All eyes turned to her. Vex tilted his head. What do you mean? Scientist Lyra. She straightened to her full height. The Lunari genetic crisis. The real reason for our interest in humans. It is not just about cooperation or peace, it is about survival. The room fell silent. Kate and Vex exchanged looks. Then Kate sighed. She is right. There is more to this project than we've shared. The Lunari face a genetic bottleneck. Their population is declining, their genetic diversity insufficient to ensure long-term survival. And humans, Mason said, putting the pieces together, are genetically compatible enough to help. Vex nodded. The war was partly driven by those who believed humans should be harvested for genetic material without consent. Others, like myself, believed cooperation, voluntary exchange was the only ethical path. Mason looked at Lyra. You knew this all along. She met his gaze. Yes. It is why I requested assignment to an ordinary human to understand if cooperation was truly possible, if humans could accept Lunari as equals, as partners. After the shocking revelations in the orientation meeting, Mason needed time alone to process everything. He walked the perimeter of the facility, his mind racing with questions and conflicting emotions. The war that had claimed so many lives had been unnecessary. A power struggle between factions. And Lyra had kept secrets from him even as they had grown close. He found a viewpoint overlooking a valley and stood there watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of Lyra's description of her homeworld. He sensed rather than heard her approach. Her movements were always silent, graceful. You should have told me, he said without turning. She stood beside him, keeping a respectful distance. Would you have believed me if I had, when we first met, when you saw me only as the enemy? Mason considered her question. Probably not, he admitted. But later, when things changed between us, I wanted to. She looked out at the vista. I was under orders not to reveal the full scope of our situation. But more than that, she turned to him. I feared your reaction. I feared losing what we had built. The honesty in her voice made his anger fade. He looked at her, really looked at her. The alien being who had entered his life as a spoil of war and had become something he could not have imagined. What happens now, he asked. She gestured toward the facility project. Genesis continues. The scientists, both human and Lunari, work to solve the genetic crisis. They study the successful pairings like ours, to understand how our species can coexist. They prepare for a future where humans and Lunari are allies, perhaps even more. More. Mason repeated. Lyra met his gaze. There are biological compatibility studies, genetic exchange experiments, cultural integration, protocols. Her voice softened. Some pairings have developed relationships beyond professional or even friendly. They have formed bonds similar to what humans call romantic partnerships. Mason felt his heart rate increase. Are you saying some Lunari and humans have become mates? She said simply. The ultimate expression of cooperation between our species. Mason turned away, needing a moment to process this new information. He had felt the growing attraction between them, had sensed that their connection was moving beyond friendship. But the idea of a relationship with an alien being was still overwhelming. "Do you?" she began, then stopped, her usual confidence faltering. "Do you find the concept disturbing?" He turned back to her. "The concept? No," he said. "Honestly, it's just a lot to take in. I need time." She nodded. "Time is reasonable," she said, though she could not entirely hide the disappointment in her voice. The next day, they began their official roles in the project. Mason was assigned to the security team, working alongside both human and Lunari personnel to protect the facility. Lyra returned to scientific work, joining a team studying genetic compatibility. They saw each other less during the day, but still shared their quarters in the evenings. Each night they would discuss what they had learned and observed. Mason began to understand the full scope of Project Genesis. It was not just about solving the Lunari genetic crisis, but about creating a foundation for a merged society where both species could thrive together. 2 weeks after their arrival, the facility received an alert. A military convoy was approaching, unauthorized and unannounced. The security team mobilized, Mason among them. They gathered at the main entrance as the convoy stopped outside. The lead vehicle door opened and a human general stepped out. Mason recognized him immediately. General Howard Fletcher, one of the most decorated and hardline military leaders during the war. Fletcher approached, flanked by armed soldiers. "This facility is now under military jurisdiction," he announced. "All personnel are to stand down." Kate Bradley stepped forward. "General Fletcher, this is a sanctioned research facility operating with full governmental approval." Fletcher sneered at her. "Approval from weak politicians too eager to make peace with the enemy." He gestured and his soldiers raised their weapons. "The Lunari are a threat to humanity. They always will be. This collaboration is treason." Mason exchanged glances with the other security team members, both human and Lunari. They were outnumbered but had the advantage of defensive positions. Kate tried again. "General, please, review our research. Our findings. The Lunari are not our enemies. They need our help, and an alliance benefits both species." Fletcher laughed coldly. "Help them? You want to help the aliens who came to conquer us, who killed millions of our people?" His face hardened. "You have 24 hours to surrender all Lunari personnel to military custody. The humans will face court-martial for treason." After he departed, returning to the convoy, which remained stationed outside the facility, an emergency meeting was called. "We cannot surrender," Vex said firmly. "We know what Fletcher represents. His faction believes the only good Lunari is a dead one." "What options do we have?" Mason asked. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." Kate looked grim. "We have contingency plans, emergency evacuation protocols, but we'd need to split up, scatter to secondary facilities. The project would be set back years." Lyra, who had joined the meeting, spoke up. "There is another option." She looked around the room. "We could reveal everything to the public. The truth about the war, the sabotaged peace efforts, the genetic crisis, the successful integration, the existence of Project Genesis." Everyone stared at her. Samantha was the first to respond. "You want to go public against direct orders?" Lyra nodded. "Sometimes survival requires breaking rules. This facility contains all the evidence needed to prove that cooperation between our species is not just possible but necessary. It could work," Kate said slowly. "Public opinion has been shifting. Sympathy for the Lunari has been growing as more successful pairings like yours become known, but it could also backfire," Mason pointed out. "Revealing that the war was partly engineered by factions on both sides could reignite hatred and distrust." The debate continued for hours. Finally, a plan was formed. They would prepare for evacuation as a last resort, but first they would attempt Lyra's suggestion. A carefully prepared data package would be released to multiple media outlets simultaneously. If public opinion could be swayed, Fletcher might be forced to stand down. Mason and Lyra returned to their quarters. Late that night, both exhausted from the planning session. "Do you think it will work?" he asked as they sat together on the small couch. Lyra considered the question. "Human unpredictability makes certainty impossible, but I believe in the capacity of your species for compassion, for understanding. When presented with truth, many humans choose wisdom over fear." Mason looked at her, realizing how much she had changed from the cold alien who had first entered his apartment. She had learned to hope, to believe in possibilities. "I need to tell you something," he said suddenly. "I've been thinking about what you said about some human-Lunari pairs forming deeper connections." Lyra turned to him, her black eyes unreadable in the dim light of their quarters. "Yes," she said simply. Mason took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I never imagined when you first arrived that I would feel this way. But something has changed, something has grown between us." He reached out, hesitantly touching her hand. "I care about you. Not just as a friend, not just as a colleague." Her silver skin seemed to glow slightly at his touch. A biological response he had noticed happened. "When she experienced strong emotions, I too have developed feelings that exceed the parameters of my mission," she admitted. Her voice softened, taking on a quality he had never heard before. "I believe humans call it love." The word hung between them, powerful and frightening. Mason moved closer to her, their faces inches apart, their worlds colliding in this quiet moment amid crisis. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we face it together. Not as human and Lunari, but as us, as Mason and Lyra." For the first time since he had known her, he saw moisture in her eyes. A Lunari equivalent of tears. "I would choose no other path," she whispered. The next morning they joined the others to implement their plan. A comprehensive data package was prepared containing evidence of the sabotaged peace efforts, research findings on Lunari-human compatibility, documentation of successful integration and genetic research that could benefit both species. Kate assigned tasks to everyone. Mason was part of the security team that would protect the communication center while the data was being transmitted. Lyra joined the scientific team, adding final touches to the research reports, ensuring they would be understood by the general public. As they prepared to part ways for their assignments, Mason pulled Lyra aside. "If anything goes wrong, if we get separated, head to the northern evacuation point. I will find you." She touched his face gently. "We will not be separated again." Mason Carter. "That is a promise." At exactly noon, the transmission began. The data package was sent simultaneously to major news networks, scientific journals, and social media platforms. The facility went into lockdown, anticipating Fletcher's response. It came within hours. The military convoy approached the main gate, weapons ready. But something was different. There were fewer vehicles than before. A communication came through. General Fletcher was demanding entry, but only with a small team. Kate made the decision to allow it. Fletcher and 4 soldiers were escorted to the main conference room where the project leaders waited. Fletcher entered, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded. "The phones at military command are ringing off. The hook. The president is calling for explanations. The public is in an uproar. Is that not the point?" Vex asked calmly. "For the truth to be known." Fletcher glared at the Lunari. "You may have won the public relations battle for now. But this isn't over. The Lunari are still a threat. Their biology, their technology, their very nature makes them dangerous." He turned to Kate. "You of all people should understand this. They came to conquer us." Kate stood her ground. "They came for help. General Faction chose conquest over diplomacy." "Yes. But now we have a chance to forge a different path." One of Fletcher's soldiers stepped forward unexpectedly. "General, the evidence is compelling," she said. "I have family who died in the war. But if what they're saying is true..." "Shut up," Lieutenant Fletcher snapped. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on Mason. "You were a decorated soldier, Carter. You fought against these aliens. Now you're sleeping with the enemy." Mason met his gaze steadily. "I fought to protect humanity, sir, and that's what I'm doing now. The real enemy isn't the Lunari. It's fear. It's the refusal to adapt, to grow, to find new solutions." He gestured around them. "Look at what we've accomplished here. Humans and Lunari working together, solving problems that neither species could solve alone. Isn't that worth protecting?" Fletcher scoffed. "Naive idealism. The honeymoon will end, Carter. They will show their true colors eventually." "Perhaps," Lyra said, stepping forward. "But is that not true of any relationship, any alliance?" Her voice was calm, reasonable. The future is uncertain, General Fletcher. That is its nature, but we can choose how we face that uncertainty with weapons and walls, or with cooperation and hope. The Lunari chose wrongly once we let fear drive us to conquest. Now we seek a different path. The tension in the room was palpable as Fletcher considered her words. Finally he spoke. Your little publicity stunt has tied my hands for now, he admitted grudgingly. The president has ordered a full investigation into Project Genesis. No action is to be taken against this facility until it's complete. It was not victory, but it was a reprieve. The military convoy withdrew, leaving only a small observation force. Fletcher warned them that he would be watching, waiting for any sign that the Lunari could not be trusted. In the days that followed, the public response to the revelations exceeded even their most optimistic predictions. People were shocked, angry, at first learning that the devastating war might have been avoided. But as they digested the information, as they saw the successful human-Lunari pairings interviewed on news programs, opinion began to shift. 1 month after the confrontation with Fletcher, Mason and Lyra stood together on the observation deck of the facility looking out at the mountains. The project had not only continued but expanded. New human-Lunari pairs arrived daily. Volunteers now not spoils of war. We have come far, Mason observed. Since that first day in my apartment. Lyra nodded. The path was unexpected, but I find I would not change it. She turned to him. Taking his hands in hers, I was given to you as a prize of war, a symbol of human victory over Lunari. And now, Mason said, smiling, now, I choose to be with you, not as a spoil of war, but as a partner, as an equal. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his in a gesture that had become their own private expression of intimacy. The future remains unwritten, Mason Carter. But I look forward to writing it with you. He rapped, his arms around her, still marveling at how perfectly they fit together, despite the differences in their biology, their origins, their worlds. This was not the end of their story, but a beginning, a new chapter for them and perhaps for both their species. The integration program that had begun as a division of spoils had become something else entirely, a bridge between worlds, a promise of something greater than either humans or Lunari had imagined. When they first looked to the stars and saw each other, Mason looked at Lyra, her silver skin glowing in the sunset, her black eyes reflecting the first emerging stars, and he knew with certainty that in this division of spoils he had received not a captive alien girl, but the most precious gift of all, a future full of possibilities, a love that transcended worlds. The spoils of war had become the seeds of peace.